Hi, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. I'm here today with Rob Henderson and Marc Andreessen, and we're going to talk about The Shield, a show that I just finished and had a large impact on me. I just finished it in the last few weeks. Rob, when did you watch The Shield?
I've watched the whole series twice. So once I watched about 11 years ago, not too long after it finished on the air. And then over the lockdowns, like a year and a half ago, I rewatched the entire thing. And I thought it was even better the second time around.
Uh-huh. How about you, Marc?
So I watched it when it was first on, and I remember it actually quite clearly because it's the first show I ever binged. So I was an investor in the TiVo that didn't make it. I was an investor in something called Replay TV, which co-invented the DVR way back when with TiVo. And so I had one of the first Replay TV units, and The Shield was one of the first shows I recorded. And I just let it pile up. I wasn't paying attention. I let it pile up for 13 episodes. And then I started the first episode like Friday night at like 6 o'clock. And I think I finished like, Saturday morning at like 4 a.m. It was completely blown away. The first season.
So this was 2002 then. Yeah. And that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like it's a very bingeable, especially like right after the pilot, you want to keep watching more because the pilot, like the ending comes so out of left field compared to like basically every other cop show ever, right? Like was this the first cop show with an anti-hero as the protagonist?
So we're gonna have a lot of spoilers here. So if anyone was intrigued by The Shield, we're gonna talk a lot about it. Yeah, okay. So the first episode, something interesting happens, and anti-hero as the protagonist. So we have I guess we had a fundamental disagreement. Who are you supposed to be rooting for? Are you supposed to be rooting for Vic Mackey and his friends, or are you supposed to be rooting against them?
Well, I think the genius of the show is that like there's no right answer to that. And I think like the show kind of plays this game, the same thing that David Chase did with The Sopranos, where like you have this extremely charismatic anti-hero and you can't help but be won over by them. But then at the very end, the show like, condemns the audience for falling in love with them and going along with their escapades. And like each season, the protagonist does commits ever more egregious transgressions to like get the audience to finally change their attitude towards them. But I think like early on, this show is interesting because it like Vic Mackey's first act is like so like over the top and so generally unforgivable, like a cop killing a fellow officer, like that I think that is the one of the it's shocking, right? It's such a shocking act, and the fact that he does win you over despite that to me was an interesting aspect of the show.
So I'll jump on my hobby horse right up front. So I think you're obviously supposed to root for Vic. I think you're obviously supposed to root for him from the very first scene to the very last scene. I think that you are much like we discussed around Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul. Like it is the story of the Nietzschean Superman. It is the dark side of the Superman, which is the only side we're allowed to see. But it is the Superman, and we have an instinctive reaction at a very primal level to root for the Superman, and he's put there in all of his glory, and there he goes. And I don't think there's any ambiguity about who we're supposed to root for.
Yeah. So you don't think the murder of Terry Crowley is like that wasn't something that you should second guess your perception of Vic?
Well, I mean, from again, I'll be on my hobby horse right from the beginning. I mean, from a Christian morality standpoint, of course, absolutely. From a slave morality standpoint, no question. From a master morality standpoint, like Crawley had to go, right? Like he was standing in the way of the Superman. Like he was standing in the way of the maintenance of order on the streets. He was standing in the way of the realization of the potential of Vic Mackey. And it's well known. I mean, it's well known. It's a trope, right? Probably was a rat. We know from 50 years of predecessor shows and movies that internal affairs is bad. Right.
Okay. Yeah.
Just to articulate for people who didn't hear my earlier speech on this from Better Call Saul. Look, there's an entire missing. This will be my claim, right? There's an entire missing genre that we're not allowed to see, which is the fully realized Superman, right? And so we're not allowed to see the positive version of this. We're not allowed to see Napoleon. We're not allowed to see the people building the pyramids. We're not allowed to see Alexander the Great. We're not allowed to see the sort of heroic version of it. We live in a fallen world, right? A world saturated with slave morality, and we're only allowed to see the dark, the dark version, so that we can let ourselves, off the hook later on. After the fact, we can say, well, we weren't really rooting for him, but of course we were.
So what would Sam Bankman-Fried think about Vic Mackey? He would be in favor, right? Because he kills Crawley, who's standing, as Marc says, he's standing in the way of law and order, and everything he's doing is for the greater good. I mean, so I don't think you have to be, like Breaking Bad. Like Walt is a net negative to the world. He's going around killing people. He's selling higher quality drugs. Vic Mackey, if he doesn't exist, you get the impression that Los Angeles would be Caracas. I mean, that it would be, nothing would work. And it's like these politically correct people like Acevedo, who wants to have just wants to run for office and, cross every T and dot every I before they get each warrant. Like, you're just given the impression that just can't work, that's just not functional. And it's these underappreciated white males who are, at the bottom of the hierarchy that are just sort of, keeping us from living in the jungle. I mean, that seems to be the message of the show.
Well, there are scenes in, I think it was season 4, season 5, where they pull Vic and the strike team off of street duty, and crime does skyrocket. And Claudette gives this, one of the more famous scenes in the show. She gives this rant in the captain's office. Who's the guy? The skinny white guy who's like the substitute captain. He's very ineffectual, kind of pathetic. But she's dressing them down, saying like, crime is rising in the city because we're not doing anything. And someone in the office says, well, actually, our stats suggest that crime is decreasing, and Claudette says that's because like the citizens don't trust the police anymore and they're not reporting crimes. And the show pretty clearly links the absence of Vic to the rise in crime. And the creator of the show, Sean Ryan, in some interviews he's actually said like the strike team is based on a real life police unit in Los Angeles who actually did reduce crime, but they themselves also sort of became criminals in the process. And, I guess like isn't this a sort of a Nietzschean idea of like becoming the monster you're fighting? And The Shield actually has that episode, right? The co-pilot episode where you see the beginning of Vic's descent into the darkness, where they first commit like their series of crimes as police officers, and how this changes them, and each crime becomes ever more egregious.
Well, so there's a deep backstory, and we should probably spend some time on this because it's very relevant to actual current events. But there's a very deep backstory right behind the show, which is the actual history of law enforcement in Los Angeles, right, and the role of the LAPD. And there's a very long version of this, but I'll just give the brief abridged version, right, which is LA was basically a newly created city in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and the people who ran it at that time decided that they simply were not going to tolerate organized crime. And so they basically, greenlit the LAPD from a very early stage to basically prevent organized crime from taking root in LA. And they basically authorized them to do whatever it took to do that and to keep order. And so that the cliche on this that people have said is that the New York Police Department, right, by legend, is corrupt but not violent, right, whereas the LAPD is violent but not corrupt. Right, the LAPD just had this like extremely aggressive approach, towards maintaining order, like as ordered by the people running the city. That played out over the decades. And you could argue the puts and takes of that all the way through. The true backstory of the show that you alluded to is that in the 1970s, crime started to really take off, and in particular, gang activity, right, started to take off, and in particular, gang activity, kind of around the South Central LA area, which is where the show is set. And so in real life, LAPD created this thing called the Crash Unit, Crash was the acronym. It was actually originally called the Trash Unit, by the way. They had a TRASH acronym, and then it actually got criticized because it made it sound like being a gangbanger was like really cool. Like you were like, and
what was the T in that acronym? Because the CR, it was Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums. But what was the T? Like T?
Yeah, it's on Wikipedia. It's some other, it's on something. Yeah, what they wanted to have it be was taking out the trash, but then it made being the trash, was cool. So then an early burst of PC at the time, and turned into the Crash Unit. And then they ran for 30 years basically with this sort of extremely like ramped up aggressive level, in particular the response to the crack epidemic and the huge spike in violence that corresponded to that. And look, a lot of people if you read the accounts of the time, a lot of people in LA, just like in other cities, in the 1980s, saw this giant spike in violence, and they're just like, look, we're just not having it. Like we're going to support the LAPD in cracking down. And then there was this turn, right, that happened in the 1990s, which there's a couple different ways of looking at it. The thing that's been well established is the crash unit that was going after the crack gangs, basically ended up with this contingent of basically law-breaking cops. And there was this particular connection to Suge Knight and to Death Row Records at the time, where one of the things that caused what became known as the Rampart scandal around the crash unit to break open with all these corrupt cops was basically these cops were working off duty for Death Row Records. And so Suge Knight basically had his own private army, of 40 or 50 LAPD cops who he could kind of order to do whatever he wanted. And there's lots of accusations around, different things involving murders of like Tupac Shakur and, Biggie Smalls and so forth around that. And so anyway, the Rampart scandal was like the full kind of an unraveling of that. Some people believe, that it's just kind of Suge Knight took advantage of a corrupt unit and just kind of hired them. Some people have a different story, and I don't know if this is true, but the other story that you will hear if you talk to people who are around in that era is that Suge Knight actually infiltrated gang members into LAPD, into the crash unit.
Oh.
So Suge Knight was associated with the Bloods at the time, and so there's a theory, at least, that people will talk about, which is basically after the Rodney King beating, the LAPD embarked on a big push to diversify its ranks because there were a lot of racial politics at the time, and the Suge Knight was basically able to get 40, 50, 60 Blood, basically gang members on LAPD into the crash unit. And that led to the thing. And in fact, when the crash unit kind of, unraveled, when the Rampart scandal happened, the original, the cop who actually first turned was actually Puerto Rican by ethnic background. And then a lot of the crash cops were black, which is, and they were kind of part of this, part of Suge Knight's whole world. Anyway, so that's the backdrop. The show did this very kind of interesting inversion, which is it made the equivalent of the crash unit, the strike team, it made them white. And so the show starts with this sort of conceit that's basically not very much based on reality, which is, it made it a story of bad white cops as opposed to bad black or bad Puerto Rican cops. Which plays out in all kinds of interesting ways. But anyway, my main point is like there was this backstory back to the thing on sort of the trade-off of having somebody like Vic Mackey on the streets. There was this thing. This massive surge in violence did happen. And the leadership of LA and the leadership of LAPD and a large part of the population of LA said, we are not going to have this. We are going to green light cops to be much more aggressive. And it was in the tradition of LA that they did that. And then, of course, violence in LA fell dramatically in the 90s and 2000s, right? And you could argue, right, lots of different arguments today as to why that happened. Sitting here today, violence in LA is like spiking like crazy, right? And like violence in South Central LA is like full on. Like the gangs are green lit. Like there's like 15 active street gangs, and they are going crazy, and they're basically green lit to do all kinds of things, home invasions and robberies, and inter gang battles, and like so we're back in like some version of like 1975 or 1982 or something, where like crime is like once again out of control. There was just a mayor's race in LA where there was an anti-crime mayor, Rick Caruso, who lost, and then Karen Bass, who sort of wants to continue the, let's say, criminal justice reform efforts of the last, 5 or 10 years. She just got inaugurated yesterday. And so I think every expectation is the high crime levels in LA will continue. Anyway, I go through this to say, I think we're actually in real time regenerating the circumstances that led to the events that inspired the show. So I think history is highly likely to repeat itself again.
Does that mean that you think that there will be like another crash team, another like anti-gang unit that will perhaps become corrupt?
Yeah. So that will be an effect. So to go through the cause quickly. So the causal chain, and I'm just extrapolating from history, right? I'm extrapolating from what's happened repeatedly through LA history, including in the 70s and 80s, which is very well documented. By the way, there's a great story about all this in the New Yorker about 20 years ago, back when they would talk about these things, which kind of goes through the whole history here for people who want to see it. And there's a Frontline documentary based on that work that's actually quite interesting that goes through it all. But basically, I'm just extrapolating off history. But what the cycle looks like to me, basically, is you implement a set of social policies that may be good or bad, but for whatever reason, coming out of them comes this massive ramp up in violent crime. The sort of good people of Los Angeles, tolerate that for a while, for all the reasons that you kind of see playing out in the news every day. And then at some point they just say enough, and at some point they elect politicians who basically say we're going to crack down on crime. A lot of people, by the way, in LA thought that was going to happen with this mayoral election. They thought that Rick Caruso was going to get elected on an anti-crime platform. It turns out he lost. So it didn't happen this time. So in this theory, basically the crime in LA will get even worse. The people will say no more. They'll elect politicians who will promise to crack down on it. The politicians will then greenlight the LAPD to do what is required to crack down on it. The LAPD will then become much more aggressive in their policing. As part of that, I think they're likely to recreate something like they'll create units like the strike team and they'll put them on the street. And they'll be chartered with what Vic Mackey in the show is chartered with, which is, establish order. Right. Basically, right. In the full version of it is run, crime in LA in order to prevent crime in LA from running out of control. Like that's right. That's the full version. Right. This is the model.
Is this the real same story? Because you just said they made them white, but okay, there's a lot that's not in common. There's no Suge Knight. There's no actual connection to any gang, right? There, and also, I don't know if this was part of Ramparts. I mean, did they, were Suge Knight's guys? Were they actually keeping order? I mean, were they the same people? The Ramparts, were they actually doing a good job, or were they just taking advantage of a situation and sort of getting what they could? Like, was there a sympathetic case for the guys involved in that scandal? Because there's a sympathetic case for Vic Mackey. I don't know if that's what it's like in real life.
Well, pull out your Rothbard, right? Like, is government the biggest gang, right? So, so I don't know. The dystopian view on this or something is like government's the biggest gang. Therefore, you want the police to be on the streets. You want the police to be the biggest gang, right? There's going to be a gang, and you want it. There's going to be a dominant gang. You want it to be the cops. You want them to keep things under control. There is going to be, the theory goes. I'm not endorsing it, but the theory goes, right? There's going to be some level of crime. Right. There's going to be people who want illegal drugs. There's going to be people who engage in other activities. And either it's going to be overseen and controlled or it's not. The crash unit arrested a lot of people. Now, probably what was happening was they were arresting a lot of Crips. Right? Like they were probably arresting a lot of their, to the extent that the crash unit and the Bloods were kind of interconnected, which is kind of what you get in the history. They were probably arresting a lot of their, opponents, gang members of their opponent gangs. Rothbard would say, well, of course they were that's what you get. Like government is a gang, they arrest the other gangs.
The show did depict this, right? Where like Vic was partnering with local, like there was no Suge Knight figure, but within the show, Vic was partnering with a lot of gang leaders. And then in real life, my understanding was, at least from what I've read, the crash unit was effective, or seemingly effective, in that their rise coincided with a decrease in overall crime. Perhaps because they were partnering with some gangs and arresting members of rival gangs. And that's kind of what Vic does, right? Like he agrees to partner with drug lords and criminal leaders and allow them to sell drugs on the streets and arrest their adversaries, in part because the partnerships that Vic forms are profitable for himself, right? Like these gang leaders give him a cut of their profits, and Vic agrees to look the other way and not arrest them, and instead arrest their rivals.
Well, there was a New York Times Magazine article just this weekend. I sent it to Rob. Mark, have you seen it? It's about Mexico, and the U.S. arrested a year or two ago under Trump. They under Trump, or maybe right when Biden came to office, but they arrested the former Secretary of Defense of Mexico. And the New York Times Magazine article about this was about the investigation that led up to this. And they ended up, it was a diplomatic nightmare, and they ended up letting the guy go. But the build up to it was these local politicians in Mexico. There's a Mexican state called Nayarit. I don't know how you pronounce it, but basically there was like a governor and like an attorney general of the state that had something like this. They were basically working with the cartels, where they would tell them, don't commit violence, keep the crime to a minimum, and they would get kickbacks from the gang, and they would support their campaign and so on. And the U.S. would go and arrest these politicians, and often these politicians were keeping order. The U.S. would do this as part of the war on drugs because they wanted to go after the cartels. And through these guys, they got eventually to the Secretary of Defense. So it's sort of it was just the Shield exactly. It's like people making these trade-offs, and the U.S. here is sort of the U.S. and the federal government, internal affairs, coming to Mexico and saying, you can't have this anymore, and then just arresting the guys.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know I haven't read the specifics of this case, but as you say this, what comes to mind is the movie Sicario, right? And which basically the point of Sicario was the U.S. government basically establishing control, effective control over the Mexican drug trade in order to basically keep it from becoming overly violent.
Okay, the New York Times left that part out. Is that what the U.S. is? Because the U.S. seems to be just making everything more violent and preventing that. Is the CIA selling crack? That would make more sense than what I read in the New York Times.
I'm purely talking about fiction. No broader comment. But look, like I think, to everything we've been talking about, like I think the big question, like the big question underneath all this that the show I think does a great job of excavating and really putting in front of us is the question of the societal compact of government and the people, and like what is the expectation of the people with respect to the degree to which the government will basically maintain order. And one view of that is, in the abstract, one view of that is all crime should be stamped out. Historically, that is a trajectory that ends in bad places. Another view on that is, liberty, people should be allowed to do what they want, in which case, crime spills out of control, which is what's happening right now. And then the middle grounds, like one middle ground is like clean policing, right? Right. And then the other middle ground is, basically, the term the thin blue line. The thin blue line is this concept of, I think one of you alluded to it. It's this thing of like, if Vic's not on the street, everything is going to get much, much worse. The thin blue line was actually coined by the LAPD. That was that is an LA coinage that from about 60 or 70 years ago. I think it was Parker, the police chief, who said it. And that's, by the way, that's been the argument in LA. Oh, again, this is not even in current events, but over the course of the last 100 years, this is this thing about LAPD being violent but not corrupt. This is this whole thing, which is like that. They looked at New York and New Jersey and those other places, and they said, we're just not having that. And we're going to have a different compact, and the citizens are going to be safer as a consequence. And and again, I'm not endorsing it, but the show does put us face to face with that challenge. And then again, what I find so interesting is it is actually the same challenge, just basically evolving in front of our eyes today. Well, I'll give you, here's a point. So a friend of mine who's very kind of connected through family into South Central LA, into the Compton and Carson areas. Crime, the crime statistics are spiking like crazy, but his estimate from all of his friends and family members in that area are violent crime rates in South Central LA right now are at least 5x what they reported. Right? So they're just like completely off the hook, and most crime is not reported either because they don't think the cops are going to do anything, or because they're afraid of retaliation, or just they at some point just take it for granted. It's just part of daily life, and so we are returning to a state of relative anarchy in real time. I'm in LA right now, so I feel in this city like that's what we're returning to, and so this question is going to get re-asked right in front of our eyes.
Yeah, the show puts Vic in an interesting position where so Vic is tasked with reducing crime, but the only realistic way that Vic can do it is if he breaks the law, right? I mean, he can't. He has to make these partnerships. Like one of the obvious ones, he partners with some drug lords who agree not to sell to kids in schools, but he knows that if he arrests them, they'll be replaced with other drug lords who will sell to kids in schools. And so Vic has to make these trade-offs himself. And like Acevedo starts off in this sort of very sort of politically correct. He's investigating Vic. He suspects or perhaps knows that Vic is corrupt. But then later, when Acevedo sets his sights on city council, he basically tells Vic, do whatever you need to do to get the numbers down. And so each character has their own sort of self-interested motives, which I find interesting in the show. Some people have compared The Shield to The Wire. And both depict cops and criminals in these sort of it portrays them as human beings with flaws. They have good and bad aspects of their character, but The Shield to me is a sort of a more realistic depiction. Like The Wire, it depicts these cops who are trapped in these systems outside of their control, and these criminals too. But The Shield is very honest with self-interested cops and criminals doing what they have to do to succeed in the worlds that they find themselves in. And so yeah, I mean, I think Vic is under this intense pressure from all sides, but he's also shown as enjoying it, right? Yeah, and the show does try to make him sympathetic with the autistic kids and with his wife and everything. But Vic himself is you can't imagine Vic doing any other in any other occupation than being a police detective.
Yeah, so Mark talked about the 1980s, the crime. I mean, I think this stuff shows that the crime spike in the U.S. started earlier, and I think you see the sort of the fruits of the war in court in this show. It's like you had the Miranda rights. You could only hold. I mean, there's been reports on what policing was like before, and basically it was like if you told Vic Mackey, do whatever you need to do to get to clean up the streets. Now you have all these rules, you have these regulations, you fill out forms, you read them their rights, you get them an attorney, and it seems like a lot of the message of the show is this is like a game. This is just like these are your so-called civil liberties, right, that the courts invented in the 1960s. But basically, they're just a bunch of loopholes, and they're putting roadblocks in the way of people actually solving crime. Like it's like these people are like too stupid to know they're so stupid. Like they'll just tell you all the crimes they committed if you put them in a room and play a few games with them. But the law goes out of its way to say you have a right to remain silent. We're going to give you an attorney. It's like if you just didn't do that, they would just spill their guts because they're 80 IQs. They're that stupid. But we've hindered ourselves through this sort of this is not like this was seen as American principles. This was invented in the 1950s and 1960s, the modern idea of civil liberties. And sure, it had abuses, but my goodness, you look at what American cities were like in the 1950s and what they were like afterwards. I mean, that's it's night and day.
Wait, the Miranda rights, did those when did those develop?
Yeah, that was Miranda rights. It was that's why they're called the Miranda rights. It was a Supreme Court case called Miranda v. Arizona in let me see what year this was. This was 1966. Before that, wow. You didn't have to say your right to remain silent, blah blah blah, all that stuff. You could, yeah.
I think every American like me who grows up watching cop shows, it's like, oh yeah, this is just a natural part of America.
George Washington,
George Washington. yeah, he was, they had those back then, man. I had no idea how recent this was.
Yeah, that was a big deal, very controversial all the way through the 70s into the 80s. And it was, and the trope in the media in the 70s and 80s was basically criminals, quote unquote, getting out on a technicality. Right. And look, in some cases, it probably was true. Criminals were getting out of technicality. It was also true that there were, to Richard, to your point, there were a lot of people who were doing confessions with no lawyer present. The movie, by the way, that shows the policing method sort of prior to in LA prior to the reforms is LA Confidential. Which kind of, if you remember if you remember the movie, there's the scene where Ed Exley, the Guy Pearce character, is questioning all the suspects in the Night Owl, or so it was the murder that took place in the diner. And he's doing the thing where he's going back and forth between the interrogation rooms, and he's playing the audio so they can hear each other, ratting each other out. And you'll notice that scene, no lawyers present, and so he's just kind of playing these idiots until they basically say the wrong thing. Again, the trade-off, right?
Yeah, even the idea that you would get a lawyer provided to you, that was not always there. Let me see, Supreme Court. I used to know this case, attorney for defense.
The cash bail. While you're looking that up, the cash bail thing that's playing out right now is kind of the new version of that, right? Because the lawyer argument was an economic argument, which is some people couldn't afford lawyers, and that was unfair. Of course, the new version of that is some people can't afford bail, and so you just let everybody out.
Oh, all right. Well, the one thing that the show did is they did any of the suspects ever hire lawyers? Very seldom did they.
No,
did you see any of that? No, did they? I don't remember any of the really. Who? Yeah, I don't think there was that many. Was
good. That's it. I'm trying to think of a specific.
That very seldom happened in the show. I mean, it seemed like every fourth episode, Vic would unplug the camera in the interrogation room, which he wouldn't do that if there was a lawyer present.
No, there was a lawyer. There was. A lot of times they would say, "I want my lawyer." They would just stop, and they're like, "Oh no, we can't question them anymore." That happened a lot.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Or Vic would intimidate them into silence, or tell them you'll get your lawyer, but first answer these questions. Yeah. And which I guess was supposed to demonstrate the corruption of the LAPD. Vic himself, he was supposed to be based on. So I read an article about the crash team or the crash unit. So Vic was based on a composite of 3 police officers: David Mack, who was a black LAPD officer, and then these other 2 guys who were, I think they were either they were Hispanic. They might have been either Mexican or Puerto Rican. And it's interesting that literally all 4 members of the strike team are white guys. I think they're supposed to be ethnic white guys. Vic Mackey's probably Irish. He retains his accent. Michael Chiklis, I think he's supposed to be from Boston. And Lemansky and Gardaki, I think they're Polish, Italian. And Shane Vendrell is like a white trash dude from the South. But they're all working class white guys. And then the racial politics of the strike team doesn't become apparent until later, when Acevedo basically forces Vic to hire a non-white member of the team. But yeah, like that was an interesting part to me too. That it was supported. It was like carrying on this trope of like racist white cops, but it was based on this unit that was actually not very. It was not really a white
I don't think
police
you're supposed to see
officer
them.
team.
I don't think you're supposed to see them as racist white. I mean, you took a much more negative
You're
view
definitely
than
supposed to see. You're supposed to see Shane as
they're
racist.
They're portrayed as justified racists. Like they're solving crimes and they're seeing who's on the. I mean, they're not like let blacks. Guy. It's not like that. They just want to go with. So by the way, Gideon versus Wainwright. This is 1963. So not until then did the Supreme Court rule that you have a right to a free attorney. So all of this stuff is just this entire criminal justice system. But now Rob, you think you were supposed to cheer for Claudette? Like, is that what you think?
I think that the show does a very it very clearly portrays Dutch and Claudette as like the good, honorable detectives. Like these are the police you would want. Yeah. I mean, especially Dutch, right? Like he's very Dutch is Dutch is bullied, he's like, no guy wants to be him, but they are like, they never do anything unethical. I mean, okay, Dutch like chokes a cat to death in one episode, which is kind of weird, but I mean, compared to the strike team, like Dutch, there was one episode where Dutch almost plants evidence and then he literally drives his car back and undoes what whatever evidence he planted because he's supposed to be.
They are going to but their ethics the crime is going to get out of control. Claudette, she has to go to like Vic when when she really needs something. I mean, it's like Sam Bankman-Fried would say, these are the villains and the strike team are the heroes. I mean, there's a clear utilitarian. I mean, there's a clear utilitarian. Now, maybe it catches up to you in the end, right? Maybe it's like short term. Maybe in the long term, in the end, he really gets screwed. And this is what I love about the show and how it ended. It's like near the end, Vic tells the cartel guy, like, "Oh, you got to realize is you've got an action hero on your payroll."
I remember that.
And then the whole show was like Vic was always like untouchable. Like he always found a way out of it. And he does that at the end, but in the most poetic way possible. And that, he destroys everyone else and loses his family and is in federal government bureaucratic hell at the end. I mean, it was just but it was a shocking between he's the overman the whole time, and then he's a bureaucrat. His suit doesn't even fit right. I mean,
transformed into the last man, right? By the end, he's a bug man.
Overman's the last man.
So on the Claudette point, I'll just make one thing on the Claudette point. So the show, I just rewatched the finale last night. The show does, if your thesis is correct about the Claudette arc, it does let her off the hook at the end. Because it lets her in her final confrontations with Vic, she just like exhibits like just flat out contempt and disgust. And so her moral culpability, to the extent that you believe that she has some from indulging his tactics and techniques to keep, crime under control, she is allowed a pass at the end in a way that maybe is dramatically satisfying, but I think, maybe let's just say sands the edges off the moral issue.
Yeah. I guess Claudette is kind of, she is perhaps culpable throughout the show. Now I'm thinking back to, I mean, she clearly disapproves of Vic's methods, but she does go to him at least a couple of times throughout the show. And there was, I mean, she also shows some loyalty to him because he's a fellow police officer when they barge in and Vic is torturing one of the suspects and like is about to stab him with like the needle from a police officer's badge and is like about to stick it in the guy's eyeball, or at least, threatening to do so. And then Claudette walks in and, kind of brushes it aside and doesn't turn Vic in for his actions. So, yeah, I guess Claudette is not a completely noble person, and neither is Dutch for that matter. But they were
hunting those people who killed those cops. They were hunting cops. So, like, Claudette will let like Vic like torture a guy for like a minute. Like, I don't think that's like. I think definitely you're saying even Claudette like would say this is okay.
But that's the Rothbard. I mean, but that's the Rothbard model, right? Which is like the police is the biggest gang. Like, again, in the fictional world, when the police are attacked, all of a sudden it's a different moral regime.
Yeah,
right. Because all of a sudden, it that's when the primal element of it's the biggest gang comes into effect. And of course, the biggest gang is not going to let itself get pushed around. And look, it's a totally understandable. I mean, I think any of us would probably have the exact same reaction in the moment. It is a disconnect from the principles of law and order and civil liberties that we've all been trained are in effect.
It makes sense to me that people would go along, especially in 2002 when the show aired, that you would root for Vic just because the whole anti-hero genre, it was relatively new. But yeah, I think that it's supposed to, you may not even, you're like, the audience isn't necessarily meant to root for anyone, but just to sort of understand the complexities of Vic's actions and to understand that, yes, if you want like low crime rates, you have to hire a guy like this, but it will come with all of these negative externalities, and there, like, you can't have like a good guy and someone who can eliminate crime. You have to accept one or the other.
The
that doesn't necessarily mean to root for him.
Look, the strike team does not have, they don't comply with the Warren court, and they don't have, perfect Christian morality, but they have a code. Like they clearly, they do not want innocent people to suffer. Like they care. Like a kid gets shot, like in their front yard or something. Like they want to, you talked about The Wire. The Wire, what you get is like these Eastern and Midwest cities. They've just given up. I mean, like The Wire, like two kids get shot in like a front yard. It just goes to like somebody's filing cabinet, and they're just sitting on their computer. That fat. I keep thinking of that fat guy in the office. One or two cops maybe cares, but it's just like the society has just, like the entire society of Baltimore has given up, and the cops are just part of that. And Vic Mackey and they care. They risk them. I mean, they're risking themselves. They're living on the edge because they're doing all this stuff. They're cutting these corners. They're getting these complaints. They're hurting their careers because in part, they want to benefit themselves, but it's not mostly about the money. It's mostly because maybe you could say it's about the thrill or the excitement or whatever, but it's also because they really care about the community. I mean, and that's like so overwhelmingly. You saying they don't?
Yeah.
Vendrell doesn't. At the end, like when they have that debate between, you see the difference between Vendrell and Vic, where Vic has a way out, and like all he has to do is like do a few things. But he's saying, I don't want the Mexican cartel to get their hooks in L.A. And then Vendrell's like, whatever, if it's not them, it'll be someone else. Just look out yourself. You see, Vendrell is a bad guy. Vendrell ends up being a malicious character at the end, but Vic and the other two, no, they're good guys. They're clearly good guys. I'm sorry, Rob.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think like they're good under the Nietzschean morality sense, but I don't think like I don't think that the show is set up to make you root for them or to be on their side. I think
95% of people who watch
the complexity. I know that they do. And I did the first time I watched it too. When I was like 20 years old watching this, I was like, this is awesome. Like, everyone loves Vic Mackey. There's this show on Showtime, Weeds, like the mom who sells weed, like her young children on the Showtime show are like, when can we watch another show with Vic Mackey? He was like, I acknowledge that he is a beloved character and he's like one of the most fascinating characters on TV, but I don't think you're meant to be like unreservedly supporting everything he does. I think you're supposed to understand, like, this is the monster who fights other monsters, and to understand that.
Well, what does he do that's monster? I mean, okay, Crawley. Okay, fine.
He kills a fellow police officer right up front, isn't that the worst thing an officer can do? Like,
it's
not a feature from Internal Affairs.
Is that right? I don't know. I think like if you're a cop killer is, like that sort of sets him up as like just as bad as a gang member, right?
He's defending his men. He's defending his family. I mean, Crawley just wants a promotion to the FBI or whatever he was going to get, the DOJ. Okay, fine. Yeah. Crawley, put that aside. Okay.
The other thing the show does well is like there's no one else to root for either, which makes it easier to root for Vic. Like Aceveda, right? He's such a slimy politician. Like, even though he is investigating Vic and his guys, you don't want him to win. And then so like the one of the more interesting villains or anti-villains, Kavanaugh, right? Forrest Whitaker's character, right? Like you don't want to root for him either, right? Because he's also like very slimy, very desperate, and he himself in the end is shown to be just as corrupt as Vic in trying to get his trying to get him. So there's no one else in this show that can compare with like Vic Mackey's level of just but
Kavanaugh, if you want to say it, Kavanaugh's basically a saint because he comes back and he confesses to everything and says, I set him up, and then goes to jail for it.
So if you want
a saintly black figure, I mean, you could cheer for if you want, but nobody does.
Wait, so is that a sort of the mirror image of Vic at the end in the finale when he confesses? Because Vic does the same thing, I guess. I mean, he does.
He confesses to get a deal. Vic confesses to get a deal,
or Kavanaugh, he confesses because he acknowledges his wrongdoing.
It's the right thing to do.
It's,
even though he thinks Mackey's guilty. Even though he thinks Vic is guilty, he doesn't think that's the right way to. So if you're like a rule follower, if you're like a guy who does the right thing, I mean that's Kavanaugh. But people don't like that.
Well, I read this interview with Sean Ryan, the creator of the show, and he said that actually the first season he was worried that Vic wouldn't come across as like sympathetic enough, and so he introduced the prostitute character. What was her name? It was like Connie or something. The cracked out white chick who had a baby, and like what was like So he added that. Like it was a weird thing, right? Because she was a very boring character. There were a couple of interesting moments with her, but every time Vic was like, she'd come into the police station like stoned out of her mind, and he'd be like, oh, like totally trans. Hey, are you okay? Like suddenly like patting her arm around her shoulder, giving her his coat and stuff. I was like, is this really Vic Mackey? It just like it was so out of character to me for him that he was being so nice to this clearly troubled person. And so to me, like this was the creator acknowledging like, oh, like Vic might actually be too extreme. Let me like show him being like, nice to the same character, because not even nice to his wife, right? He's always like, I gotta work. He's like barely around his kids. Like there's no other opportunity to show Vic in a positive light, really. And so they added this prostitute character. So to me, this is just like further evidence. Like even the showrunner was like kind of trying to soften the edges around Vic.
I thought he was just having sex with her. I didn't think that much of the prostitute.
Having sex with crack lord? No, come on.
He was. Well, you said he wasn't?
No. With God, what's the prostitute's name? No, I think it was Connie. Yeah.
No, I thought they had an affair. I thought they were having a long-term affair. They weren't?
No, they never did. No, I think that was like they didn't have an affair, and I think that was an intentional decision to show that Vic was he had a glimpse of morality, some grain of goodness within him, that he would care for this woman despite like no sexual interest, no there's nothing he could gain from her. He's just being nice out of the goodness of his heart. And he helps to. Does he help? I think he helps to like set up a murder. Or no, she kills one of her Johns in a hotel room or a motel room, and then Vic sets it up to look like self-defense. So yeah, he didn't get anything out of this other than sympathy for this person.
At some point, I remember someone says like, "What we have with him, it's more than sex, or it's better than sex." I really thought they were.
Maybe she said something like it's more than that, but I think she was just saying like there's an emotional connection, or it's a no. That was just an add-on, last-minute add-on because Vic was too monstrous for a typical American in 2002 to fully get on board with.
I think though these guys, I know they have this concern. I think they probably could push these characters a lot further. I mean, like even Scarface, right? Like, I think they could. This goes to the my Nietzschean thing. Like, I think we're so starved for Superman stories that you could actually push these to be a lot darker.
I think.
Training Day. Okay, I'll give you an example. Training Day, right? So Training Day is the movie that immediately preceded The Shield. And Training Day was also based on the Rampart scandal. And actually, it was more true to life because Denzel played a character named Alonso Harris. The original, kind of Rampart cop was Rafael Perez, so sort of a thing there. And then, the Denzel character in Training Day, Alonso, like pushed things a lot. I would argue, I think, a lot further than Vic did.
Yeah.
Even still, like for most of the movie, you're definitely rooting for, Alonso. Right? So
yeah. Yeah, but like, they're super charismatic characters, though, right? Like Denzel as Alonso and Michael Chiklis as Vic. I mean, it's impossible not to get caught up in their sort of that level of confidence and competence. Just being good at your job, being able to get out of any situation, having a very close relationship with criminals in the streets. And like, I actually don't think Vic is even portrayed as like whatever, Richard, like how did you put it, just like a reasonably racist or something. Like I think Vic is actually not, I don't think he's racist at all. I think you very like clearly see him build relationships with criminals, and he doesn't hold any racial like Shane is clearly racist. Like Shane has multiple, we can get into that too, but I think Vic is just like a very street savvy officer who he understands the reality. And actually, the guy who trains Vic, interestingly, is what's the guy's name? Apollo Creed, that guy who plays Apollo Creed, the black guy.
Carl Weathers.
Carl Weathers. He returns for an episode and is understood to be Vic's mentor when Vic was a young officer. Right, Carl Weathers' character was a senior, or no, he was forced to resign or retire or something because he himself had committed a bunch of brutal acts as a police officer. He was fired or something, and Vic actually learned from him, and they still maintain close relationship. And the Carl Weathers character actually tries to get Vic involved in some kind of criminal enterprise, and I think Vic has to decline. So I mean, I understand Vic's. The intrigue around him and the charisma, but I don't think that that you're the intent is for you to say like
I'll tell you the one thing besides Crowley, the one thing where I thought he went like every decision is always some balance of take care of my family, take care of my bed, and like stop crime, which he doesn't need to do, right? What he doesn't care about is rules, is legal procedure. But when they robbed the Armenian money train, there was no greater good. That was just simply we're going to get our money. Now you could sort of think about it like these guys, it did have terrible consequences. So they were maybe too reckless, and they're getting people hurt. But you could also look at that as like sort of justified payday, right? Is it better to go to the politicians and the whatever? Where does money go when it gets seized? Some useless LA city program. But I do think it's so sad. Like you always talk about like Overman. Like at the end when he gets his job with is it ICE or DHS whatever
it's
whatever
ICE.
it is.
ICE.
It's ICE, and then he gets it's like the contract is like $60,000 a year, and I'm just like sometimes these amounts of money these guys are like doing it for. It's like this guy is like this guy is keeping Los Angeles safe. He doesn't seem to be compensated enough. His dream is just a $60,000 a year job. Like that's what he needs to be secure, and he's struggling. And it's sort of I mean they're ridiculously underpaid these guys are ridiculously underpaid for what they do. But like some of these guys do nothing and they're overpaid, right? It's like government. The incentives are just screwed up here.
Well, I think the money train is like the show right before they robbed the money train. It did sort of increasingly portray like Vic being financially strapped because he has the two autistic kids and they need therapy and medical treatment, and I think they want to send them to some kind of special school. And Corinne is on his case about this, and so. Yeah, I think that that factored in too, and these are like reasonable, sympathetic reasons for Vic to want to rob these criminals, right? Like no one cares about like Armenians being this criminal gang being robbed. So, but that was sort of the beginning of the end, right? The money train issue. I think that kind of led to the unraveling of the strike team.
Yeah, that turned them into an actual criminal gang. I think was the intent, which is what it pulled off, and then that led to them turning.
Yeah, I think two of the three kids have autism. That's like statistically not very high, and I don't think you're supposed to think it's like because Vic did it to them, because the girl, when she gets diagnosed, is like 2 years old or something. So you're supposed to think it's genetic. And then when Corinne goes and confronts Danny at the end, and she's like, just so you know, Corinne tells her, 2 of my 3 kids has autism. And it's like Danny's like, and they say like, who has a defective gene? Like, you don't know if it's me or Vic, so like, be careful. So it might be Vic. So like, it's heavily implied that this is genetic. Like, I don't know. Is Vic like an autist, or is Corinne like seem like an autist? I mean, why are they passing down these genes?
Vic's on the spectrum, and that explains. He's neurodivergent. Vic is a neurodivergent man. He explains his actions throughout the show. It excuses them actually. Does Vic? So Danny. I mean, the affair with Danny. That was. I mean. Vic has multiple affairs throughout the show too, and was that like what was the reasoning there for his character, right? Like if you're supposed to like, does that fit into like the Nietzschean Uberman or Overman story of just Vic what is like, how does that fit in? I guess of Vic having affairs.
Every Superman story has the Superman takes what he wants, right?
Yeah, I mean, but then does he express contrition and guilt though? Like Vic is like upset. Like there's a very sad scene where once the house is empty, Corinne takes the kids and leaves. Like Vic is like microwaving a TV dinner and standing in his kitchen, and Aceveda drops by and talks to him, and Vic is clearly unhappy here. So I guess the Overman has feelings too. Like if his wife leaves him.
He lives in a Christian culture. He's trying to fit in. Okay. He's trying to have a bourgeois life. But it's not. He's the Superman. It's not
the
enough.
Overman needs a TV dinner, and okay, yeah.
I mean, hits the streets, right? Like there's gangbangers to take out.
Yeah, that's true. He doesn't even he's upset in that one scene, but then after that, he does get over it and get right back to his job and doesn't really think twice about it and sleeps with that hot dog trainer. So yeah, okay, all right,
Trainer.
The blonde woman, she trains the police canine unit. And
okay, yeah, I remember this.
Vic's like, hey, you still got that boyfriend? Yeah,
he's always on the prowl. Yeah, and the way the show ends.
Yeah,
the show it's him on the prowl. He picks up his gun and he's looking for trouble. He's looking to be useful. Sure. He's not staying in that desk. He didn't last one day sitting in that desk. He's out to find some fun.
He's a shark, right? Well, he also sleeps with Kavanaugh's wife or ex-wife, Kavanaugh's ex-wife, right? Yeah. Sweet butter. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, is that so? Is Vic is very charismatic, but is it so? Because he's never turned down. You never see him like Dutch, right? Dutch is repeatedly shot down. You see every date for him goes wrong. It's just one thing after another with him.
The way a man like Vic is shot down is the way different from the way Dutch is shot down. And he'll just hit on a girl, say something, and then she'll ignore him, and then he'll laugh it off, right? Well, Dutch, if he wants a girl, he's he makes her sort of reject him, right? It's sort of I think that these are sort of different types. But
there was the nice twist, by the way. I didn't notice it's the first time I watched it, but I watched it and started rewatching the finale, which is in the last episode, Dutch finally gets game.
That was the one.
With no awareness. With no awareness that he's doing it at the time, right? Because all he's doing is exhibiting contempt for a lawyer, and it turns out it works.
Yeah, that was great. No, you're right. You're right about that.
Wait, what were the circumstances around that? Was that with the Hispanic young?
Do you remember Billings, the partner who was lawsuit, that his lawyer comes down to talk to Dutch, and Dutch ends up getting her number by playing it cool, basically.
He doesn't even realize it. Dutch is so good at his game that he's totally unaware of, that he gets her number and he doesn't even realize. He thinks she's trying to represent him or something. And he's just whatever. And then Danny walks over and is like, you've been working on your game.
Yeah, I remember this.
And he's like, oh, it worked.
Well, we thought Dutch was. I mean, so there was talk that one of the writers wanted to make Dutch a serial killer in the end, and it looked like we were heading in that direction. But it was a much more pedestrian arc where he just ended up getting a girl's number. So let's talk about. I want to talk about the Vedrell thing, because that hit me so hard. I cried. I have not cried watching a show. I can't even remember the last time. I have children about the same age, so I have I know what it's like to have a pregnant wife and a toddler at the same time. It was me very recently, and Mara, you start out hating Mara, right? You start out, you just hate the woman. She's ruining this this crew of band of brothers that are keeping the streets safe, that are so romantic, and she just comes in and nags him to death and is just terrible. And later on, she becomes first of all, she's redeemed to a large extent. She was right that Shane needed to get away from Vic, and then she's just loyal to the end. She's pregnant. She breaks her collarbone. She goes. She kills for Shane. She she doesn't want. She says the family's not going to split up. She's suffering. She's a devoted wife. She's a devoted mother in the end. And then I'm rooting for them, and I want them to make it. And then, my God, I don't know. That hit me hard. So what did you guys think about the Shane's ending?
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised by it. It was. I mean, in hindsight, it's not that it's not completely unexpected, but in the moment, I didn't actually anticipate Shane. He didn't seem like the kind of guy who would kill his own family, right? Maybe himself, or it just seemed very, I don't know, a little out of character at first for him to have killed Mara and the kids and then himself. And
the thing, yeah. So they
remember though the problem is she was going to go to prison also. They were both going to go to prison.
Yeah, but he thought that, like, did he make? Well, I guess, like, Richard, you sent me that link about, like, was Mara in on it the whole time? But for Shane to make the decision himself, like, I'd rather kill my wife than see her go to prison.
Because he spent the whole he spent the whole episode trying to get a deal. The finale, he spent the whole thing trying to get a deal for her, get her off the hook for when she killed the person in the previous episode, and he was unable to do so, right? And so the turning point was when he had the phone call
with Vic.
One of the fun things about the episode was we relearned how LA public phone booths are apparently indestructible, because he's just like pounding the shit out of the phone booth, which is a classic thing, but. He did that call with the lawyer, and the lawyer's like, "Yeah, there's no deal." And then he goes and gives the girl the money in the convenience store.
Yeah,
and that's when he. And then so then once he's staring down the barrel of, he's going to prison, she's going to prison, she's going to give birth in prison, and then both of the kids are going to go into the foster system, right?
Yeah.
And he's got no connections, no hookups, no nothing.
And
so
the foster. Yeah, the foster system. Yeah, they were horrified by foster. Yeah, they were talking about the beginning of the episode, like foster, like, and she's like, I can't go to jail. Like, so it's sort of she was, I don't know, like, I don't know if they were explicitly in on it or she was sort of hinting at him, but I don't know. Vic sort of, you sort of think Vic, maybe he does it because Vic, like, at the end, like, I'll send you a postcard from Space Mountain. I'm going to visit your kids. All right. I hated Vic at that moment. All right. It was like Vic would, like, go and, like, hang out with his kids. Or I don't know if literally he thought Vic would actually do that, but it was like, Vic was going to get off. He was going to get off with the whole thing. I kept thinking at the end there was like a possible for a deal. Like if Shane and Vic could have even after Shane like sent that guy to come, they could have. I think they could have worked it out. I mean, I think they could have been like Vic could have been like, we'll work together. You still haven't ratted on us. We haven't ratted on you. We had that black guy incriminating you who you sent to kill Roddy. We'll just work it out. So we'll say like this is like a sting operation and like they could have worked. I think they could have worked something out if Vic could have forgiven Shane for killing Lem, right? He had to get vengeance. He had to get vengeance for that. And then when he kills the son with the little police car, he gives him the police car because like his daddy was like a cop. He must be so proud of him, and he gives him that as his dad is killing him. It's tough to watch. And then then he commits. Yeah, go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, well, something that just occurred to me, and now it actually helps me to understand. Maybe it is in Shane's character to have done that because Shane does take it upon himself to kill Lem, right? He doesn't consult Vic. He doesn't consult the other strike team members. It seems somewhat impulsive on his part too to do this. Yeah. He was, considering the consequences and looking out for himself and kills Lem. And so I guess that does fit with his character to also do the same to his family and to himself.
He folds under pressure.
But he does he folds under pressure. He has that in him. So yeah. I guess it does that helps to understand his character more.
Plus, he's really drugged out at the end. Mara's like, "Why are you doing all that?" He's like, "Oh, I need to have energy. I need to go fight." But he's like, he's snorting whatever coke or meth or whatever. Like with his last flirt with that Asian girl, that underage Asian girl, and he just gives her the money.
Did he and the Asian girl? Did they do any? Did he just give her money, or did that turn into a?
He was just a cashier, and he's like, "Honey, you old enough to be working here?" She's like, "I'm 16, dirty old man." And he's like, "What you study?" She's like, AP Chems, like a college girl. Then he gives her like this stack of 20s. He's like, "Well, that's too much." He's like, "If you ever take your nose out of a book, like maybe you'll go have some fun." All right, it's just like this Asian girl, like starting with at the end.
That didn't go anywhere. Okay.
No,
I just remember that.
That was just he was capitulating. He didn't need money anymore. Like he had made his decision.
Okay. So that was to help us to understand that. Well, okay. I thought that like the whole like the collapse of the Vic Shane friendship was very well done, because if you think about the earlier episodes, like the early season, like they were so tight, and Shane like did keep his mouth shut about Terry Crowley under intense pressure, right? Like we talk about how Shane will fold under pressure. There was that scene, I think in the second episode, where Aceveda takes Shane into the interrogation room, and he's like, I know you and Vic killed Terry Crowley. And he's right. right in his face, and Shane is actually terrified. You can see in his eyes, like he's this close to breaking, but he doesn't, right? Like that's how much he values Vic's friendship and how much he trusts Vic to get them to get them out of this. But what breaks them is a beautiful woman, right? Like Shane falls in love with Mara, who is, not the most sympathetic character, but she is very pretty and a little bit loopy herself. And Shane is kind of crazy. And so together, like that was just like a toxic cocktail between the two of them. And that was basically like very realistic. Like what could break up a friendship between two, men, brothers who had been through all of this together? It's gotta be a woman. It's gotta be a relationship, right?
Well, the other thing the show does a really good job of showing, right, is something that's become very unfashionable, right, which is the Band of Brothers thing, right? So a group of men on a mission together, with no homosexual overtones, no just like full straight up male bonding pack, behavior with a clear leader and the wingmen and like, that whole thing. And then I thought the Mara character, like, that's a cliche, right? But like that character was, I just thought, outstanding, like just incredibly fantastically realized, like such the extreme version of the kind of woman who would break up the Band of Brothers, right? Like just like it's maxed to 10 on every front. So I thought it was a great portrayal both of that masculine bonding effect and then that sort of hunting party thing on the one hand, and then detonation effect of the wrong woman at the wrong time.
But yeah, at the beginning, like when he's first involved with her, you don't see like the nobility. You don't see why Shane would like be so enamored with her. But I think that last season, when they're running together, I think you see it. I think there's something. She's redeemed in my eyes. I thought she was it was just such a beautiful arc, and then she passes away. Although I was reading some people on Reddit and they were speculating that she was actually in on it because they were making a good point. It's like, how easy is it to I went back and watched the episode to see where Shane got the poison. Like we never see like what he has. Like must have something that's odorless that kills someone peacefully. And that doesn't have any taste and doesn't have any visual evidence when you give it to somebody. Like that doesn't seem like the easiest thing in the world to do. But sometimes
I think they made a reference that it was the painkiller. It was her painkillers, wasn't it? I think they made a reference.
Is that a peaceful? Was it? That would take a lot. That would take a lot. You would need a lot.
Her pain meds in the water, right?
But that has a first that has a taste. That has a real taste. So he could have.
So this was Mara's painkillers.
I think so. They made they made a reference in the end. There was some reference in the script.
So does that mean that Mara? That must mean that Mara was in on it then, or no?
They don't show, right? They don't show the preparation of the. They don't show the preparation of the poison. They don't show the drinking of it. They just show the results.
Yeah. I mean, it's believable either way, whether he did it on his own or she's in on it, because they're both like unhinged enough to be willing to kill their own kids. Like it was, that's I wouldn't buy any of the other, like Vic doing it. I don't think he would do it, but Shane and Mara, like that makes perfect sense to me.
Well, the counter argument is she was really out of it because she was in so much pain. She was, she probably dehydrated at that point. Like he had to go by water. Like, and so, she was not in a position to, argue when she got funny tasting water, and then, the kids, really young.
Yeah. The son, poor little Jackson.
So she was in. Okay. Then her pain. Like she's like in a state of suffering, and Then either way, it makes sense. But
by the way, I'd also say, Richard, I agree with you. It's sort of a cliche, but like the first time I watched the show, I didn't have kids, and so I just like watched it, and I was like, okay. And then now, I've got, we got a little boy, and it's just like I was just like, I can't. I just fast forward, like skip.
Yeah,
I'm not going to subject myself to this. I was literally like not looking at the screen because I didn't want to see it.
It's the most.
It lands like catastrophically harder when you actually have a kid like that.
Yeah, every other, the pregnant wife too, because the wife is pregnant and you have a kid, and like I was in the exact same situation, like a year ago. It's like, and you wonder, like sometimes you hear about these things on the news. It's the most unthinkable kind of murder. Every other murder is like so easy, like compared to that, and you just think, it must be like. Shane was just like out of his mind on drugs. It seems like they must have seen some things in the the foster system to them was like just a kid being tortured all the time. They just say like in passing, like Mara says, my mom won't take him. Shane says my family. Like we never get the backstory of like why Shane doesn't have any family anywhere who could take his kids, but he just says that. And you just think, well, there must have been another option. But he's like, at the end, he's like, and then his suicide note is like, and we're always going to be together. We're going to be in heaven. I think he says they're in heaven. I don't think he says I'm going to be in heaven. I think he doesn't think he's going to be joining them. But yeah. I don't know. I don't know how much religion, if any, played a part in his decision making, but I found that pretty interesting.
But again, there on my hobby horse, right? So that's he thinks he has a fallback, right? He thinks he has he's not the Superman, but he's the Superman sidekick. And in the end, he thinks he has a fallback in Christian religion and in Christian morality, right? Which sort of lets it, in his own mind, lets himself off the hook. Like, and then there's multiple two questions on that. One is just like, is that real? Like, are they actually going to heaven? But even it's just like there's also just something maybe a little bit, in addition to everything else that's sad about it, there's something sad about the idea that the Nietzschean Superman, at least sidekick, would in the end think that he could be saved by Christian morality.
Yeah, it seems. I don't know if there was Christian morality because unforgivable sin is suicide. Maybe he accepts he's going to hell.
No, but at least for his wife and kids, though, right? Like,
so then if he killed them, then they have a shot at heaven. He does not because he killed them. It could be construed as a selfless act.
He could have repented and then had the suicide by cop. He shoots himself. I think that's an unforgivable sin in most kinds of Christian morality. If he repents for his sins and then gets shot, he could have. But I don't know. I don't know if God would have let him in on that technicality.
Is it distasteful to say he did die suicide by cop because he himself is a police officer? So, technicality. He got into Christian heaven. I find it interesting in the show that Lem, he was probably of the strike team the nicest guy, right? Like you see him, like he actually has a conscience. I remember when I rewatched it the second, I remember the first time I was 20. I was probably drunk half the time I was watching the show, but I thought the entire time the whole strike team, they all knew about what was going to happen with Terry Crowley, and they knew the entire show. And then the second time I watched it, I paid much closer attention, and I was like, so you see in the beginning of the second episode of the show, they say, oh, Terry Crowley was shot and he's dead, and Lem, like he punches a window out of a car, like breaks his hand. And I thought that the first time I watched the show, I was like, damn, they're really committing to like pretending to be innocent. He breaks, he punches breaks his hand on a window. But the second time, no, that's really Lem, like actually upset and distressed at the thought of a fellow police officer dying. And so Lem is like, he's the only one with a conscience, or the strongest conscience of them. And he dies like a very horrible death, with the grenade in his lap. So is this? I guess this could be maybe aligned with the Nietzschean morality idea of if you need to get rid of whatever, like do what you have to do to advance. And so in that sense, Shane killing Lem is a sort of the same thing as Vic killing Terry. No.
Well, I mean, to the extent that they're still on the Superman track. I mean, to the extent that they've just become a gang. To the extent that they're just like fully, out for themselves and money, that makes it a less, at least, interesting Superman arc. But
yeah, and I guess with a Terry Crowley, like he was a mole, he was a rat, whereas Lem, we never knew for sure, right? Like Shane did it of his own accord, guessing that maybe Lem would fold, whereas Vic had he had faith in his friend and believed that Lem wouldn't crack and wouldn't turn the team in.
Yeah. I mean, I interpreted it as sort of the sidekick trying to make the decision that he thought the main guy would make, and quite possibly making that decision wrong for the exact reason that he wasn't the main guy. He wasn't actually the Superman.
Yeah. He flew too close to the sun. Yeah, like he tries to tell. There's one confrontation where then Shane is like, I did what needed to be done, like what it, and he's like, no, you did it because you're weak. And I think that really is sort of highlighted the difference between
that would be
them.
The condemnation. I mean, imagine Genghis Khan criticizing his lieutenant for unnecessarily killing somebody, right? It's like No, you don't get it. Like, you're not, you're not being the Superman.
Yeah, Rodney is also. I mean, at the end, Vic wanted to go kill Mara, Mara while she was pregnant, and then Rodney was like, "Don't do that, don't do it." I mean, he was trying to talk him at least out of that. So there was, Rodney had, I agree with you, Vic. In the last 2 episodes, I'll agree with you, Rob. I think, everything was understandable until like I think the last episode. Like, his hatred of Shane, although justified for what Shane did, I think, was too far. I think he should have forgiven him. But Rodney ends up, but it's funny, like these, like Rodney and Lem, I didn't even know their names until like, I think 3rd season or something. I mean, they were really in the background. It was just Vic and it was just Shane. And then, Lemansky has his own thing. And then Rodney doesn't become anyone until like, later on. So
season,
it's like,
they really bring him back at the end, right? Rodney was like, really a nobody. I forgot his name too. And then like the final season, I think they bring him in to basically, increase the importance of his character so that it hits you harder when Vic turns him in to save Corinne and the kids. But I don't know, that was a weird thing because like apparently a lot of people, when I was reading about the reactions to the finale, a lot of people turned on Vic because he betrayed his friend. But to me, it made perfect sense because he was trying to save Corinne and the kids. So that was like, if you have to choose between, your friend and your family, like that was understandable to me. And on the other hand, it was like Vic's done so many other horrible things. This is like the least of his crimes. So I don't know. It's hard to feel bad for Ronnie too. Ronnie was a bad guy. Like Ronnie was in the car. So this is another thing that surprised me that he didn't know about the Terry Crowley murder either. Or he pretended not to know. Ronnie knew all along. Ronnie was portrayed as probably the smartest, like the highest IQ of the 4 guys, right? Like Ronnie's really good with computers and stuff, and he's like hacking safes and whatever. And in the final season, one of the episodes, he's sitting in the car with Vic, and basically he says like, I know what happened with Terry, and he says, I wish you would have told me so I could help protect you better. And so Ronnie was like kind of, quietly in on it all along, despite Vic not knowing about it. So Ronnie was like a very smart and clever guy. And so, I didn't feel bad for him at all when he was, when Vic turned him in. Like he was in on it all along, and he was in on all of the other strike team crimes.
You're such a good Christian man, Rob. You're the only, all of us, everyone else won. The rest of the world saw a different show than you did. You are so hung up on Crowley. I mean, is Crowley that great?
No. I'm not. I'm just trying to make the argument that these aren't good guys. Like, they are effective guys, but they're not good.
If Bankman-Fried was here right now, what would you tell him if he made the case that these were the best, these were the most effective altruists in all of LA County?
Are they effective altruists? I guess in a sense they are, right?
For $50,000 a year, they're just keeping the streets safe, probably saving, hundreds of lives. I don't know, like, I think so.
Talent from leaving, like when crime increases, talented people flee. But with the help of the strike team, they're actually attracting, entrepreneurs and stimulating the economy indirectly. So
Vic has a secret spreadsheet where he's doing his utilitarian calculations. Right? If I kill this one IA guy, I'll save 1,000 kids from drugs.
Yeah, I think
expected value is clearly positive.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Sam would approve.
Sam would approve. Sam doesn't like rules. Sam likes, Sam likes bottom line results, and Sam would say Vic Mackey is. Maybe I should. Sam Bankman-Fried's talking to everyone. Maybe I should try to talk to him about the Shield. I'll get his take straight from the source. You do, but the racial politics. So we touched on this a little bit. Did you guys notice at the end, like when it's like the first time at the bar, Roddy gets arrested, Vic goes off. There's none of the 4 strike team, and then like there's a call and they all go out. There's like no white males, I think, left in the entire room. It's like those were all the white male characters, and it's all women. What about the what is that girl? The tiny Hispanic girl that came in?
Tina.
What was her name? Yeah, she keeps getting like like the female cops keep getting like beaten up or their guns taken away from them, and it's sort of like, and so you have this thing where it's like, oh, we need a minority for PC. Oh, we can't have white guys, like no matter how like good they are busting down doors. You have the black community, how they're portrayed, like when Acevedo's running for mayor and he's like, more police, and they're like, I'll tell you something, man, this is the military industrial complex, and they're all like, clapping for this. The sort of the racial politics are very, I think, right wing. I mean, the message there, I think, is not, not The Wire. The Wire, I think, is, sort of realistic, but also has a, a center left bent. I think this is a extremely right wing show.
So this is my theory. This is my theory of the show, which man, again, this maps straight into LA politics. Like this maps into real LA politics, by the way, that continue to this day. I mean, you guys saw that whole thing where the the city council, what was the Hispanic city council people were taped saying bad things about black people or whatever. Like, so this racial politics are like alive and well in LA. And so my view on this, I didn't get this the first time, but I got this later on. My theory basically is that, right, the actual crash unit, as we're talking about, was like black, Hispanic, Puerto Rican. I mentioned the Training Day movie. The character, right, the Dead Zone movie was named Alonso. So it's maybe just black named Alonso, or maybe sort of shades of maybe one of the parents was Puerto Rican or Hispanic. And so Training Day kind of actually Training Day was actually based on maybe more of the actual racial politics of LA. The show did, I think, the way I think about it is it did an explicit trade. Or see what you think of this. It made the dirty cops white, and the trade was it was able to be more raw about everything else.
Oh, yeah.
Or maybe you could say it made the dirty cops white, and then it made kind of the moral avatar a black woman, and maybe the combination of those two decisions, right, is that it meant that the portrayal of what was happening on the streets could be a lot more raw. Because obviously, if the show were being made today, like you could not have a lot of the stuff that happened in the streets, like you could not do it the way that they did it. And this, it was 20 years ago, but it was only 20 years ago.
That makes sense to me.
Right. So anyway, like Richard, to your theory, it would be like it was the decision to flip the race of the dirty cops, and then that enabled it to be right wing in sort of every other respect.
Yeah, but they're also, yeah. So I think that's right. I don't know if a lot. I mean, you could have black cops, and then it's black cops are morally ambivalent, and then you are bad people, and then you have the criminal. Yeah, I guess then the cops would be bad, and then the criminals would be bad, and everyone would be bad, and they would be black. Yeah, I think that's right. That's hard to do.
Or all the, I mean, look, if you made the show today, it would all be white. They'd be white gangs, right? It'd be all the gangs would be white, right?
Yeah, it would be silly, right? Yeah, it would be hard to.
Whereas in the world of the show, at least many of the gangs are either black or Hispanic, and so they're able to. Which by the way, it's just
they did have the one with they had a one K-Town, Koreatown episode where there was this guy and like they wouldn't talk to the cops. I don't know how often that happens because they keep out the black and the Hispanic gangbangers. I don't know how often that is in Korea. That happens in Korea to how many shootings are. But yeah, they did have that one. But you're right. The vast majority is Mexican cartels. It's black criminals. There is no white street gangs. It's so, yeah. It's like the
Armenians. I mean, I guess you could argue.
The Armenians. I think they had like a couple of run-ins with like the Irish mob or something, which seemed a little,
Well, they framed the guy for being. Didn't they frame that guy? He was like had a connection with the Irish mob or something with the Armenian money.
Yeah, tried to pin the money train thing on him. I think that's right. Yeah, I forgot his name, like O'Brien or something.
Yeah, so it's telling the truth about the cops, but also about the political class, right? All they care about is like demographic representation. Like even like they don't people don't really care if like the crime goes up or down. They're easily led away by like especially the last episode that guy who's just like a demagogue who just is like an Al Sharpton kind of figure. He gets shot and he gets killed, but you figure like he's like has Antoine Mitchell, like the streets love Antoine Mitchell, right? He's another one of these street heroes. So yeah, the community and the politics and the criminals are all portrayed as like sort of dysfunctional. And yeah, it's these white cops, which you guys, I mean, have flaws, but really the only ones who are willing to make any kind of sacrifice for the community. I mean, Acevedo's not personally sacrificing himself. Claudette just wants a desk job where she follows the rules. Anton Mitchell is not a good guy. Maybe they all like justify to themselves that they're Vic Mackeys in their own way, right? They're all like, I'm the guy who's going to keep order. but yeah, it's it's clear, it's clearly, it's right wing because if I'm right, that we were supposed to see the show through the strike team and to see their dilemma and see like the situation that they're in and root for them. Yeah, that makes it even more right wing. I mean, it's like it gives a plausible deniability. Oh, Wikipedia summary, white corrupt cops. You watch it and it's like these are the heroes, and everything else is just a nightmare in this city.
Oh, and the show is set, and it's set in a fictional, Farmington, but it's set in, in fact, it's effectively set in Compton, Carson, that area, Inglewood, and there's very specific problem in that area today is these gangs, like it's like full on.
Yeah, the show tries to. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that the show tries to balance this out. Like, I agree that, like, generally the show is, I mean, to me, the show is just very honest, which kind of by default makes it right wing. But the show does try to balance things out with the Dutch Claudette dynamic, such that almost every single killer they're trying to catch or suspect they're interrogating, it's always a white guy, right? It's like either like a businessman who is also a child molester. Or, I don't know how many serial killers are in LA, but it seemed like Dutch was constantly chasing serial killers throughout with his, criminological profiling schemes. And yeah, so they had to like balance it out where, okay, so many of the criminals that the strike team are chasing down are Black and Hispanic. But then, there's also these other, there's also these white guys who are molesting kids and stacking bodies up in their backyard. And so they have to, they had to have some kind of a balance there.
Well, it is. And it is true. I mean, look, it is true that the famous serial killers have tended to be white, right? Like Ted Bundy, right, and so forth.
Well,
Charles
the
Manson.
Famous ones, but Richard, you noticed the ones that are widely reported on, but there are some others that are, non-white.
Yeah. Me and Rob just did a 3 episodes on the Jeffrey Dahmer miniseries, and yeah, we talked about everything serial killer. Yeah, I think blacks are represented at least at the level of their representation of the population, not as much as other kinds of crime, but yeah, the idea that they're all white is sort of.
There may be many more black serial killers, but due to systemic racism in our society, they do not become famous.
Correct. Yes.
That is actually unironically true. That is like the one, criticism of like a race society. It is true. We don't pay attention.
The woke are more correct than the mainstream.
Yeah. Where's the Netflix series on the black serial killers, man? Why are we talking about Jeffrey Dahmer, 40 years later, I thought that it's a very sort of Hobbesian show to me. Just like this war of all against all would break out if you didn't have some semblance of order, which looks very ugly if you didn't have this this Leviathan, or you're talking about like Rothbard, right? Like you need to have the monopoly on violence, one group that has the most sort of capability. Otherwise, the gangs would all just sort of run over each other and kill each other constantly.
Yeah, that's what's so amazing, and so amazing. We're kind of rewatching it now. It is literally what's happening right now, right? Yeah. The state in Los Angeles, and as you guys know, many other American cities, the state has ceded its monopoly on violence. It has just simply decided that it's not going to exercise it, and the crime is going absolutely bananas. Yeah. And it is a state of nature. Like things are very, very bad in the area of LA that the show is set in today. Mm. And so we are back to the exact moral dilemma that you're talking about. And it's either going to devolve into just flat, horrible anarchy, or, at some point somebody is going to green light a Vic Mackey.
You are creating Vic Mackey, liberals. You've been warned.
Those are the two options. I mean, those are the two options, right? And so, I mean, there's another broader thing I think about a lot, right? Which is like our culture is so incredibly like left wing overall, and led all these sort of policies and so forth. But like, the sort of defining genre of the last 20 years in popular entertainment has been, the superhero movie. And all the superhero movies and shows, right, are all kind of inherently right wing because they all kind of propose that the existing system of maintaining law and order doesn't work, and you need this, you need this Nietzschean figure. You need this, whether it's like Batman, who does the work the cops won't do, or whether it's like a literal god in the form of Thor to come in and assert himself. But you need some external force to come in on top of the social compact to restore order. And so there is this incredible strain. I mean, it's a cartoonish strain, but there is this strain of right-wing morality that's sort of embedded in all these. And, if you want to squint, you could say Vic Mackey is the superhero of the streets, right? Which, again, is an inherently right-wing concept. And so, there is something, like, maybe take it from another angle. when Dirty Harry, Dirty Harry came out, I think the year I was born, 1971. So I don't remember what the reception was at the time, but at least reading about it after the fact, it's a little bit like people were like, well, maybe he's right. Dirty Harry's the bad guy. He's torturing the suspect in the stadium, like he's doing the things, that you're not supposed to do. But, that was when there was the beginning of the massive crime wave. And, it's the same thing. Like people root for Dirty Harry. He does the things that the system won't do. This does seem like a perennial theme that just keeps popping back up because at a deep primal level, we may say that we want all these rules, and we may want everybody to be Mirandized, and we may want everybody to be able to get out on technicalities, and to not, put criminals in jail and all the rest of it. But like we are in the end, we are simply not willing to tolerate the chaos that results.
But we don't even say we want all that stuff, because if you look at like the tough on crime messages, I mean, those are the things that, like, if you look at people who've studied like ads in the last election cycle, like the kind of messages, like for Democrats or Republicans, like being tough on crime actually works. Now it's like there's a big difference between like what like people's instincts are. You can look at it and how people vote in pop culture versus sort of. It's been captured, the entire sort of area of criminal justice has been captured by people of a certain ideology. And, not even like right-wing people now say get rid of Miranda rights or whatever. It's just been so normalized that's like, we accept it. It's like we've moved so far left. And we want the delusion that all this stuff is consistent with, safe streets in the American context. And you could have all the Warren Court stuff, and you can have, if you just give people, enough, you get rid of systemic racism, or you just redistribute income enough. Oh, look at Scandinavia. Look how little crime they have. But we don't want to acknowledge that there's a real trade-off here, right? It's not just we can't have everything, at least in the American context.
Well, LA, I guess the challenge I'd make to your argument though is LA. We did just relitigate this, and it was very clear. The mayoral race in LA was all about crime and criminal justice reform, and you had one candidate who was very much going to go back to the older model of actually enforcing laws and empowering the cops, and you had the other candidate who was very much on board with criminal. I mean, it was the theme of the election.
I looked at Karen Bass. I mean, I read some of Karen Bass, but she doesn't come out and say I am for more rights for criminal, right? It's like she does not as enthusiastic as Caruso, right? Like I would bet if you just listen to Bass's statements, like the average citizen can't tell like that, she's going to be the more easier on crime candidate. I don't think they make it that easy for the voter. Give me a quote. Give me something. What has she said that's like so like the voter would hear?
I'll have to look up her quotes. It was very clearly. I thought it was very clearly coded in the election.
You're a smart guy. I mean, maybe not to everybody, right? It was like some people would have.
Well, look, there's also maybe in fairness, maybe in defense of what you're saying there. Again, LA racial politics are alive and well. And there was a very big racial difference between the candidates, and so maybe that trumped everything, but. The result of it is going to be a recreation of the conditions.
What is the ethnic background of the winner of the?
Karen Bass.
She's a black woman. Oh, interesting. Okay.
Right. Kamala just swore her in. So Kamala just swore her in public. Big public event last night, outdoors with everybody wearing masks.
Okay, good.
Oh, beautiful.
Good.
Okay, so we have a prediction from Marc. There's going to be a increasing crime in LA. And we are going to get a Vic Mackey on some, that's something down the line.
I mean, it's just a question. For sure, look, crime is incredibly elevated now. It will continue. I don't know how much worse it gets. It's pretty bad now. I think it probably gets worse. And then does Vic Mackey show up at, next year or 5 years or 20 years? That I have no idea, but I'm pretty sure he's coming.
Oh, 2022. You're right, Marc. 2022 had the highest number of murders in LA since 2007. So we just hit something like a 15-year high.
Yeah.
It's bad. And again, those are probably sandbag numbers. They're probably substantially higher.
Well, murder. I mean, murder. You can't hide murder, right? I mean, that's the one that's honest.
Maybe somebody
right?
died of COVID, Richard. Maybe they died of COVID. Yeah, I mean, they have.
I think there are parts of LA. I think there are parts of LA where there is not an accounting on who lives and who dies. I'll just say that.
Okay. Well, yeah. I believe it. There was a Time story about Louisiana, like releasing people, but then people like staying in jail just because like the paperwork doesn't get like passed through. I could believe that in like rural Louisiana, Mississippi. Maybe I underestimate or overestimate whatever Los Angeles.
Of LA.
Marc has a very darker view of our county. Okay, well, yeah, this was great. Marc? You've any recommendations, shows, movies, documentaries about crime, LA, the Ramparts scandal. We'll put it all in the show notes, but anything you could think of.
Yeah, so there's tons and tons of theory. It's one of those things in LA kind of crime lore. The Rampart scandal has become like the Kennedy assassination or something, or Manson, where there's like tons and tons of work that's been done and people have lots of theories. There's a book called Labyrinth that people like a lot that kind of goes through all this stuff that might be worth reading. I don't know whether it's accurate or not. As I said, there was this piece in the New Yorker about 20 years ago that I thought was, a good outline of the situation.
Who's the author? What's the title? Do you remember anything about it besides?
I can look it up if you want. It's and there was a Frontline documentary that was based on it. Maybe we could put it in show notes. And then the other fiction I'd really recommend. So I mentioned the movie L.A. Confidential. So the novel L.A. Confidential, for those of you who haven't read it, written by James Ellroy. The novel's like 10x the depth of the movie. It's incredibly sprawling in its scope. And for those of you who don't know, so James Ellroy, I think, is probably the best living American novelist. He has spent his entire life basically writing about Los Angeles and the sort of dark history of LA. And he basically lives in the past. He lives in like 1950s, 1960s LA. He basically just reads newspapers and reconstructs, kind of what happened, and then writes these kind of amazing crime novels, political novels. So anyway, LA Confidential really is the novel is an incredible recreation of LAPD and all of these issues in the 50s. And then there's a sequel to the immediate sequel novel to LA Confidential is called White Jazz, and it's never been made into a movie. But it's a novel about a Vic Mackey character set in the probably early 60s, who is like Vic Mackey on steroids. I would say it's even more extreme. And I think it's like a first person novel through his point of view. And so it's I think a quite stark, recreation of the kind of prehistory of all this, of Richard, of what LAPD was like, at least, as portrayed later in fiction in the era before all of the reforms. And so for people who want to kind of immerse in that world the same way that the Shield immerses you in the more modern era, that's where I would go.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. We'll put all that in the show notes. And the Frontline documentary, I found, I went to Amazon and I searched for Ramparts. I didn't see any good books. You see this Labyrinth one? Okay, I'll look at that one. But I saw one or two.
So the Frontline documentary is called LAPD Blues.
I found a webpage for it, but I couldn't find the actual video. LAPD Blues.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't seen the video. And then there's a link to the author of the New Yorker piece that the documentary is based on. The author is Peter Boyer, Boyer.
Okay, Peter Boyer, New York.
Google Peter Boyer, New Yorker, LAPD. It pops up. Here the article is called Bad Cops. It's from May 13th, 2001. By Peter J. Boyer, and it sort of tells the story of this character Rafael Perez, who was the first of the crash unit who got arrested, and then kind of the unspooling of everything after that. And so at least that's the best article length description that I found of what actually happened.
Yeah. Okay, and I'll recommend the recent New York Times piece, Mexican. Arrest. Let me just find the title of this that I just inside the case against General. It's called the Cienfuegos affair. Inside the case that ended the drug war in Mexico. That's by a guy named Tim Golden. It was just in the New York Times Magazine this last weekend, I think, mid-December. Okay, Rob, any movies, shows, anything kind of around on the topic?
Well, so I wrote a piece about the Shield, probably the most recent, long form piece on this show because it's been off the air for 10, 15 years. It's called, I titled it after probably the most famous line of the show, Good Cop and Bad Cop left for the day. I'm a different kind of cop. So yeah, just look at my Substack and you'll find that piece, and it goes a little bit more in depth to some of the points I've been making throughout this conversation about the complexities of Vic and whether you should be rooting for him or not, and what the point of the show is.
By the way, Good Cop and Bad Cop left for the day is a direct Nietzschean allusion, right?
Oh, is it? Oh yeah, beyond good and evil. All right,
good and evil.
Right. Interesting. Okay,
maybe intentional. Cop, bad cop. What is it?
Good cop and bad cop left for the day. I'm a different kind of cop. Vic says it in the pilot when I think, was it Dutch, asks Vic to help interrogate the suspected child molester, and Vic shows up in the interrogation room with a phone book, like a lighter and a can of kerosene or alcohol or something. Right. And later, so there was a deleted scene. I watched this deleted scene. Later, you see the man after Vic is finished interrogating him, and he's shivering in the corner, and he's urinated on himself. So yeah, I think they cut that out of the episode on Basic Cable. Maybe a little bit too intense.
All right, guys. All right, this was fun. Until next time.
All right.
Good.
Thanks, Richard.
See you guys.